And then let's go. Oh, there we go. And let's go with just one more before we get started. Let's go with Lisa. How you doing today, Lisa?
I'm doing well. Just finished
Good.
my quick dinner. Just
Nice.
kind of dropped by. So say hi. Hi, DeAndre. How are you doing? And
Good.
actually, I was maybe hoping do you have any comment regarding on the February administration on the MBE? Because I believe they're gonna have the Cal Bar going to have the vendor to make the MPE question. I was
Mm,
wondering if do you have any insight on that or not?
yeah. We could definitely talk about that towards the end, but yeah, we know that the NCBE is changing their bar exam. They'll no longer be making the MBE. Currently, the California bar gets their MBE questions from the NCBE. So what's going to happen when their provider for MBE questions is no longer providing? So yeah, there's nothing official yet, but the idea is that they will be basically outsourcing to get those questions made, and they'll have their new bank of multiple choice questions. So yeah, I think without any, too much information, it's hard to give really too much of an opinion or thought on it. The idea I can imagine is that they're going to be designed to somewhat reflect what we've seen currently.
Hmm.
I can't imagine they would drastically change it, but hopefully it is adjusted for the better, and we see something a little bit more like what we see on Adaptive Bar and UWorld. But I definitely think it's going to largely be a wait and see approach on, yeah, if they even announce where they're going to, who they're going to partner with to make the questions, and then what do those questions actually look like compared to the current ones.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. That's my understanding. So it's kind of like pros and cons
Yeah.
because MBE has been a stronger suit for me, so I'm not worried about it regarding on practice on it because I practice a lot and I have my own approach on MBE, but
Mhm.
just back in my mind, I was just thinking, is it going to be tougher? It's going to be easy.
Yeah.
Because
And it's definitely right.
that's the
It's
unknown
and
because,
who
it's a
knows?
brand new territory.
Exactly, exactly. So we shall see. But all right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started with today's presentation. So today's workshop is our breaking down the bar MBE strategy. So unlike the essay workshop where we are given the essay questions from the previous administration, we don't get the MBE questions, right? So today we're not going to be going through as many, right, practice questions in a similar fashion that we did with the essay. But today we're going to talk about strategy, right? And hopefully we can understand where our areas and room for improvement are with the MBE. All right. So let's go ahead and jump into this presentation. Oh, there we go. There's mouse. All right. So let's first start off with understanding the components of MBE success. Okay. Give me 1 second. Let me turn something off. Okay, awesome. So the components of MBE success. So as we see here, right, in Perlita, we were just kind of talking about that, but maybe there's that understanding of the law or gaps in the knowledge that might be a contributor. And yeah, 50% of your success for MBE starts with an understanding of the law, right? It's very difficult to perform on any of the portions of the exam, right? Or especially the essay and the MBE if you don't know the law. Okay, so that's number one, is that we have to make sure we're filling in those gaps, right? So we saw that with yesterday's essay workshop. If we're not quite understanding all the various doctrines, right, it's hard to know what's even going on, to accurately issue spot, to accurately analyze, etc. So after you get that understanding of the law, right, then the other 50% is split between these core skills, these core multiple choice skills, and then the intangible skills. All of them come together for what you want to, use to be successful. Uh, I hope, we've noticed I ended up putting one of these skills on both sides, both core and intangible, and that's reading comprehension. And the reason why I have it on both is because it is that important to put it on both sides. And it really is both a core skill and one of the intangible ones. So it starts with reading comp, right? And again, we saw some of this even yesterday with our essay, but you really have to pick up what the question is putting down. You have to be guided in the direction the question is taking you. You have to get those key facts. Sometimes the entire answer and outcome can literally come down to one sentence and maybe even one word. Right. So a lot of the times we're dealing with reading comprehension issues in that we're making up facts, we're reading too fast and missing facts, right? Or jumbling them up and things of that sort. So got to get that reading comprehension down. Next on the core skills, issue spotting, rule memorization, thorough analysis, and correct conclusions, right? So honestly, very, again, similar to essay on that core skill side, right? But then we look at the intangible skill and you have time management, right? We know we have to do those questions, right? In a very short time period. You have a minute and 8 seconds, 1.8 minutes. You have 1.8 minutes per question to get through this. Okay. So there's not really a lot of time to waste. For those that struggle with time, you know what that feels like, where you have about 20 minutes left and you still have 20 questions, right? You still have 30 questions, 40 questions, however it may go. And so we have to figure out, how do we get that pace with going through these questions in a way where we're not falling victim to that time pressure. Next is critical thinking. And we also have process of elimination, recognizing patterns, and recognizing traps. We're going to talk a lot today about patterns and traps, so let's leave that. But critical thinking is an intangible skill that I think is very important for the MBE. Let me go to Perlita on this one. Perlita, what did you use to practice your MBE questions last go round? What resource did you use?
I used Adaptable.
Okay, so when you sat for the exam, did you feel like every area of law and every question that you saw was similar to what you did in Adaptive Bar, or did you feel like you came across some unique questions or some unique areas of law?
I definitely felt the latter. I come across some questions that I felt like I never even had looked at, which is weird because I felt like I did the over 2,000 recommended during my studying period, and I still felt like that.
Yes. Okay. So, Perlita, I don't think that's ever going to change. And again, this is the nature of the problem that we have with the MBE, is that it's essentially a closed universe. They don't give us those questions after the exam. And the other reality, right? The way you want to think about it is that when they are deciding to create essays, they have a pretty small collection of topics that they'll choose from, right? A small bank of topics they'll choose from, right? For contracts, right? Statute of frauds, mistake, formation, right? Etc. You don't typically see some of those random nuance things like delegation, accord and satisfaction, right? It's a very limited group. But when you get to the MBE, it's almost like there's this infinite universe of this nuance that they can test. And it's really impossible to cover all of that nuance in your prepping. So what that really then means is that when you're on the bar and we are now accepting that it's inevitable that you're going to come across some law that you're not familiar with, well, you're no longer relying on you memorizing the rule. You're no longer relying on you knowing the pattern here. You now have to rely on critical thinking. You have to rely on your general understanding of that topic. You have to maybe kind of see what world you're in and use something to establish, right, some logical thinking here. So that critical thinking is very important to do, right? And the opposite of critical thinking in those situations is essentially panicking of I haven't seen this, I don't know, and what's going on? Where most times, there is a logical route to success with those questions that are well known to be nuanced and not something that, the bar takers know most students are focused on studying. So that's critical thinking. Process of elimination, we're going to talk about this. This is very good, but this is, remember, a backup way of going through questions. So we're going to talk about the legally fit approach to multiple choice today. But at the end of the day, process of elimination is still a good skill to have here. Not your primary skill, your primary approach, but you still want to be able to say, hey, that's not right. That's a misstatement of the law, or that is a completely off topic area of law that they're bringing up here, things like that, right? Where you can get rid of those answer choices. All right, so that's your components. Let's talk about the most common issues with multiple choice questions. Number one is reading comprehension, right? Something so simple, yet so important, and something that a lot of us struggle with, even if we don't realize it. You must slow down and prioritize your comprehension over issue spotting. Clarify and summarize as you go, and be hands-on with the question, right? My tool for improving my reading comprehension on multiple choice was that almost every single question, I jotted down something, right? As far as like some type of image, some type of summary of what was going on, just to make sure I was putting pen to paper as I was reading through. So if it was like, from the question yesterday, Brian and Sam are entering into a contract, I just do a line, B dash Sam. All right. Oh, it was for 500 gallons. All right, 500 Gs. So it's not as so much I'm taking notes. I'm just literally like putting it out of my brain and onto paper as I'm going, just for the sake of making sure I'm attentively reading. Okay. And that really helps, right? Because we all know the endurance aspect of this, right? 100 questions at a time, it's easy to kind of get lost in all these fact patterns. It's easy to start to glaze over those questions. As soon as you start glazing over questions, it's really hard to analyze them. So you got to stay locked in and sharp. Next is second guessing. All right. This is a very, very popular one, right? And it says here, determine your gut feeling, validate or adjust your gut feeling, rinse and repeat. This habit is developed with intentional practice. So the strategy I'm going to give you today is going to help with second guessing, because number one, what sets you up for second guessing is when you are looking to the answer choices to see which answer sounds the best. That's setting you up for failure, because the bar is intentionally putting in more than one answer choice that sounds good, right? So that's why you always hear, and I'm sure, some of you have said, man, I got it down to 2 answers, and, I hope I picked the right one, right? That's intended by them. So what we want to do is avoid relying on this approach of like, which one sounds better to me? And you want to think of it more so of, I want to go into the answer choices knowing what I'm looking for, right? That can avoid second guessing, because once you find what you look for, you want to confidently choose that one and stick with it. Another way to help improve your second guessing outside of going into the answer choices with an idea of what you're looking for is, while you're practicing, right, you all want to make it a habit to pick a side. So often in my workshops, right, we'll go through essays, multiple choices, questions, etc. And I'll ask a student a question of like, hey, so what do you think on this area of law? Or what do you think on this hypo? And a lot of times students will be scared to pick a side, scared to be wrong, right? And so they kind of stay in limbo. Well, when you stay in limbo, you're robbing yourself of the opportunity of adjusting your gut. So literally every time you're doing multiple choice questions, I want you to realize what is being tested, what's the critical issue, and then take a stand. Like, what is your gut feeling telling you? Yes, this person is guilty. No, this person's not. Yes, they are in breach. No, they're not. What is your gut telling you? And figure out why. And then simply go through the question, see what the answer is, to see if your gut was right or wrong. But when the reality is that the experience here is what's going to improve you for the next time you see it. If you don't take a stand, you're robbing yourself of even seeing what your gut is. And then you can't use your gut on the day of the exam. All right. And then lastly is a big problem is no strategy, right? No strategy, again, is free flowing through these questions, reading the question, going in, seeing what answer choice looks the best and picking one. That is not what I recommend at all. And that's how you fall for a lot of the traps that they set. All right. So we want to take control of the question. And so that is where we're going to introduce our legally fit strategy. Woo! So first off, understand that in order to do well on the MBE, it takes practice, 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 practice. Now, first off, it's the quality of your practice, right? We've all heard about the quantity, but I want to talk about the quality, right? You have to focus most of your time on practicing questions to learn, not to test yourself on your knowledge and your timing. That's just one of the common issues that we get into, right? But we've talked about this day in and day out about just like how you get better at things. And we've given all the analogies. And with anything in life, any skill you're trying to develop, anything you're trying to acquire, right? The way you get better at it is taking your time and doing proper practice, not trying to rush to perfection. And in theory, it's like that rushing to perfection is typically what can hold somebody back because they're not appreciating those steps that need to be taken. So we'll talk about quality of practice today, but remember, right? It's not just about how many questions you do, but how well you do them. Now, when it does come to quantity, because that's important as well, the goal is to do at least 2,000 questions, right? So Perlita just mentioned that. She hit that number. At the end of the day, you just need exposure to the different fact patterns, right? To the different ways it's tested. So that way you can be familiar with as much as possible on the day of the exam. And that way you are reserving your critical thinking for those that are truly nuanced and unique. But you don't want to be using your critical thinking and using that time up for questions that you could have answered really quickly had you been exposed to it prior. All right, so here is the legally fit multiple choice strategy. All right, it starts off with skimming the answer choices for soft triggers. What I'm doing here, and actually we go through each slide, so here it is just in summary. So skim the answer choices for soft triggers, read the question gingerly and attentively, right, to promote that reading comprehension. Now here's where it gets very specific. Pinpoint the subject and specific topic, look up the rule, come up with the answer, select the matching answer, and then reflect and take notes. All right, so let's talk about each one. Step number one, skim the answer choices. Narrow down the subject and topic, spend 5 to 10 seconds skimming these, and solely for the purpose of identifying the subject being tested, and if possible, the specific area of law within that subject. So you're not looking to see process of elimination, which one's wrong, which one can you rule out, but just what buzzwords can I identify here to get a sense of where I'm at, all right? That's what that goal is there. Okay, so after you do that, then you read the question with intention. It says first, lock in. All right, these are many fact patterns, and therefore most of the facts are important. When practicing, take breaks as needed. You want to avoid losing focus and gazing over questions. Be hands-on. We mentioned that on how to do that. Diagrams, circle the parties, underline things. Just stay moving and stay putting pen to paper. That typically helps us stay locked in. And then read the entire question. Sometimes we're moving too fast. We don't even read the entire question. Again, things can come down to one sentence or even one word. All right, so pinpoint the subject and specific topic. Now, this is, again, the beginning of the real uniqueness, I would say, of our approach at Legally Fit, which is, here's the background on how we got here. Every question, right, is created like this. I want to test Michael, give him a multiple choice question in contracts. So what do? I look at my outline, I find a rule, let's say it's accord and satisfaction. I look at that rule, I figure out the specific sub rule maybe that I want to test, and then I'm like, okay, that's what I want to test. Then I build a fact pattern around that to test that rule. I give that fact pattern to Michael, and he does the question. Your goal when doing questions, everybody, is to reverse engineer a question. So with me, it starts with the rule that I want to test, and then I build facts. For you, it starts with the facts, and then you want to see, what is this actually coming down to? What is the intended rule here that is the focus of this question? All right. So that's as simple as that is. Like, spend a second trying to reverse engineer the question to see what specifically does this come down to. All right, so you see here in the example, don't just identify that this is a contracts question. Go a step further and realize that this is revocation of an offer. In practice, if you can't figure out what subject or topic is being tested, you can't reverse engineer the question, then you need to go straight to the explanation or rule, right? Because in theory, you're just essentially not ready with your understanding of the law yet to do this question. So you actually need to pause this multiple choice practice and realize I need to fill in this gap in my understanding. So not only do you need to go to the answer choice and kind of get an explanation there, you probably then want to go into your outline and your other materials used for explaining the law to better understand this topic so you can see why it was triggered. All right. So remember that, like when you're in practice and you're just completely lost, that's a pause on multiple choice. And now it's time to troubleshoot my understanding. During the exam and exam simulations, if you can't figure out the subject or specific topic being tested, then you have to rely on any of the following, right? Logic, common sense, kind of going into that critical thinking, just go off of your gut feeling or use process of elimination. Okay. But we don't want to do that as much as possible in practice because now is the time to fill in those gaps. So that way, you do know it for the next time. So that's pinpoint subject and specific topic. After you reverse engineer the question, now you look up your rule. Okay, Perlita, when you were doing practice questions out of curiosity, how often were you looking up your rule or having an open outline while doing questions?
I would only do it if it was something that I had never really like seen.
Got you. Okay. So basically you had it there, but you wouldn't rely on it consistently. So what I want to inspire, show you the way, and reverse condition your brain is in the way of like using your outline is not cheating. Okay. So a lot of times we've been conditioned to believe that no, you need to go off of what you know, your memorization. But the reality there, Perlita, is that a lot of times we don't have the rule yet memorized. So if you're going off your memory of a rule and that memory is inaccurate, which a lot of times in the early stages of bar prep it is, you're now analyzing based off of an incomplete or inaccurate rule, which now means you're getting the wrong answer choice, not because you weren't able to apply the law, but simply because you didn't remember the rule. So we want to remove that variable for being a reason why you got this question wrong. I want you to have the fact pattern in front of you from the multiple choice question, have your rule that's full and accurate, and then from there, can we get the right answer? Because a lot of times we can't. And so now we know that this is an application of the rule issue. And that's our big focus. Memorization is difficult, but we focus on that much later. And it's a lot easier to memorize when you follow all these steps in this way throughout your 10-week program. Okay. So look up your rule. That is the message here. This actually, as you see at the bottom, ends up helping you with memorization because you're looking up your rule, you're seeing it, you're applying it, and that is further ingraining the actual accurate rule for you. Okay. And then lastly, it allows you to hone in on accurately applying the facts to the rule and your ability to do so. All right. So after you look up your rule, next thing you're going to do is come up with your answer. This is also a step that we don't always take. Okay, so I literally want you to look at the call of the question, but then go through an analysis and go all the way through. Like, is this going to be a breach? Is this defendant going to be guilty, right? Based off of, this being a burglary case, right, et cetera. Run through the entire rule on your own. And after you finish, you should come up with an answer. All right. So it says here, eyes off the answer choices, analyze the law, not your emotions, apply the rule, determine the outcome, and know the main arguments or reasons why. Do a thorough analysis of the entire rule framework, including any exceptions. So just talking a bit deeper about a few of these, analyze the law, not your emotions, as a reminder. You have to be structured. Sometimes we're a little too loosey-goosey, right? I've seen this even in this recent go-around, doing consultations and talking to students and in sessions where it's like, they'll just go directly off of their gut feeling on something instead of being structured and applying the rule. Well, that means you're really applying your emotions or your idea of the rule. You want to literally go to your rule. Next, know the main reasons why, right? There's a skill in realizing what this comes down to, right? This issue comes down to whether this was actually consideration, but offer and acceptance, that's easy here, right? Or in another hypo, it's like, this really comes down to whether there was an offer. Because if so, consideration and acceptance is easy. You need to be able to know what is the key critical issue. And then lastly, do a thorough analysis. There's so many times where somebody worked through the analysis, or the general rule, I should say, but forgot to do the exception. So now they picked the answer choice that ignored the exception and is partially right, but it's not completely correct, because you have to account for the exception as well. So always do a thorough analysis. We never want to get a question wrong just because we stopped early. Okay, so that's coming up with the answer. Next, and now this is the fun part, select the matching answer. This is where it's a matching game, right? So now you get to go into the answer choices and find the answer choice that best matches what you just went through. Okay. And then that is hopefully then what avoids the second guessing. Still skim the other answer choices just to make sure. But once I find something that matches what I came up with, something has to be really, really, really compelling to take me away from that. All right. So it's almost like, 9 out of 10 times I'm sticking with the one that I selected, but every now and again, maybe, I didn't account for something that's highlighted by that other answer. But again, like, you want that to be a very high threshold to switch you over. Okay. And then lastly, reflect and take notes. All right. So Perlita, I'll stick with you one more time, and then I'll get you off of the hot seat, I promise. So how much time would you say, Perlita, on average, you spent after each question you got wrong? Let's start with questions you got wrong. How much time would you spend on a question you got wrong afterwards, kind of sitting with it on average? Yeah.
On average, I think it really depended. If I felt like I'd never seen it before, it would take me maybe like 15 minutes to try and grasp it. If I was like, it was like a more common mistake, like maybe I just read too fast, maybe I got overwhelmed or whatever, I would just briefly look at the explanation, maybe like 5 minutes.
Okay. So anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. So that sounds like a pretty good amount of time. So there's no issue with you moving too fast over questions you got wrong. And maybe we can talk about ways to best use that 5 to 15 minutes. Now, what if you got a question right? Because typically we do slow down with ones we got wrong. When you got one right, did you simply just move on from it? Yeah. Do you feel like you spent adequate time with the questions you got right as well?
I feel like I did. Maybe I'm wrong, but I
Okay.
feel like if I would briefly, I knew the ones I guessed on, or I knew the ones that felt like I was a little bit stuck on between two questions. Those are the ones that I would go back and be like, okay, why was I stuck? Or
Got
why
you.
did I get
Good.
blah blah?
So first off, that's really good, Perlita. I'm really happy to hear that. And I hope that's the case for all of us in here, that we are comfortable and okay taking our time. Because so often we're so consumed with hitting that quantity number of over 2,000 that we're just flying through these questions. So that's really good that you're already making sure you're spending the time learning from these. So one thing that hopefully then in your case I can add on to what you're doing in that time frame is extracting patterns. So we see that as a bullet point, both when you got a question wrong and when you got a question right. And that's something that we don't often do. And we're going to do some exercises right now and get some practice with. But extracting patterns to me is what is key on how to really soak up the best lessons from the practice that you do. Okay. So that's that. Just before we get into practicing with extracting patterns, so remember, you kind of have, right, like when you're getting tested on normal concepts, right? Offer, acceptance, blah, blah, blah. But then you have those questions, even in Adaptive Bar and U World, where it's that like random little small rule. When that's the case, make sure you don't like freak out about that or spend too much time on those. You really just want to take that experience in so you can be ready for the next time you see it. If you happen to see that same nuance multiple times, well, it's actually leaving the category of nuance and seems more so like something you do need to know. So remember that, right? When you see something that seems kind of out of pocket, something that you haven't seen before, just take it in, right? But you don't want to obsess with that because, again, it's an infinite universe of that material. But try to just, right, get that vibe of like, okay, so this is what it is. And you add that to, again, your collection of your understanding. All right, so let's practice extracting patterns, okay? Because a lot of times, and I realized I had to come up with this exercise because even though I said it, it wasn't entirely clear just how exactly that looked. All right. So let me go to somebody else. Thank you, Perlita, for letting me call on you in that first half. Michael, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, cool. So let's look at this first question. All right. Michelle walks out of her home to take the garbage can to the curb. Her neighbor Fred is having a bad day. He notices that Michelle places her garbage can slightly in front of his driveway. Fred then orders his pit bull Rocky to bite Michelle. Rocky bites Michelle and causes a laceration on her leg. What is the basis of Michelle's lawsuit, and will she be successful? Okay, so really quickly before we get into the answers and patterns, right? Reading comprehension. This looks like it's a torts question. What I always like to look at in all questions is like identify the issue. Like, where did the issue occur, right? So really the big issue here is when Fred orders the pit bull Rocky to bite Michelle. Then you have a lot of background information leading up to it, and then what the injury was. Okay, so with that said, do you have an idea here, Michael? What is your gut telling you? What is the basis of Michelle's lawsuit, and will she be successful?
Battery.
Okay, battery. And do you think Michelle will be successful?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so again, simple question here just to get the idea of this concept. So that is battery, and yes, she will be successful. Now, I'm going to ask you to turn this fact pattern and this outcome into a pattern. Like, how can you extract a generic pattern out of this so that you could apply it to other similar scenarios? And one other maybe helpful thing is like you're basically wanting to generalize the facts, right?
When, I mean, like in like an algebra kind of way, it could be like when X tells Y to do something that injures them through touching, that person is guilty of a battery.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a good start. That's exactly what we want to do. I think we can make it a little bit more tangible, and I could definitely promise you most people in law aren't going to think in algebra.
I'm in law to get away from math. I hate maths. It was just like I was trying to not say necessarily Michelle and Fred, but just like anyone and any. When somebody tells somebody or their dog or anything to create an injury on somebody else, that creates a lawsuit that could be successful for battery.
Okay, there we go. Again, I think you got it, right? And then again, you'll just get better with making that as concise and perfect as possible. But here it is, right? I think from this, I would take away that the defendant ordered an animal to cause harm to the plaintiff, and that was a battery. Right? So that exactly is what you said in a cleaned up manner. But and then you were saying ordered another thing. So you're kind of dancing around the fact that, right, a pit bull is an animal. So we would just say like, all right, we ordered an animal to do this. So you order an animal to cause harm to another person. That's a battery. That's our pattern. So this is how
But would you do it that specific as opposed that the reason I said thing is because I was worried that you would limit it to an animal. If you order somebody else, or you order an animal, or you order a machine to hit somebody, or then it's so I wasn't sure if the pattern is too.
I agree with you. And that is the nature of doing these, is that even though you want to generalize it, you don't also on the other end want to overgeneralize it because it may not apply to then, so you do want to then, you could always add on to your patterns, right? When you see other hypos. So with this one, it would be safe to say just off of this question alone that when somebody orders an animal to harm somebody, that's a battery. But to say that whenever you order anything like a machine, like that would either need to be a rule or we have to see other questions to add that on. But we can't take that away from this question. Does that make sense?
Totally. So when somebody does it with their dog or with their prized, camel or whatever,
yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to think of like
another animal. Like, the cat.
Yeah,
that's another normal.
Yeah, animal. I guess a cat. Nobody really like. I don't know. Okay.
Thank you. So there, and look, so that takes us into the next question. So this is the nature of bar prep, everybody, right? Like it's the same, for the most part, the same laws, same rules are testing, and you can only test it so many ways. So what they're doing is taking the same patterns and they're just shifting and changing the facts around it. So instead of neighbor and Fred and garbage cans and all this stuff, right? It's just all this other background information and maybe a different type of animal, but you have to just see the pattern in it. And then that gives you that expedited analysis and outcome. All right, so let's go to then what another question would look like. Jody is at the zoo with his family. Jody starts teasing the monkeys. Upset, the zookeeper commands the monkey to jump the fence and slap the man in the face as a joke to send a message to the other guest of the zoo. What is the basis of Jody's lawsuit, and will he be successful? In 2 seconds, Michael, you can tell me the answer to this, which is what?
Sorry, battery, and yes, I muted. I muted to make sure my dogs were
No
barking in
worries.
the background.
So yes, this is a battery because this is a defendant ordering an animal to cause harm to the plaintiff. So look how it's the exact same pattern, right? And all we did was change it from a dog to a monkey. Instead of neighbors, we're at the zoo and it was the zookeeper ordering, right? But it's the exact same thing. So again, I'm doing this right now with you all with a very simple rule and a very simple concept of battery. This gets more challenging and more difficult when you layer in the more complex rules. But use this simple rule to see, again, the challenge of making a pattern, extracting a pattern, but then see the benefit that it has, right? That's the goal, is that when you get to the day of the exam, there's a certain number of questions, more than half of those questions, hopefully, you're running through like, oh, I've seen this pattern before and I'm going through it. You also want to be reading questions through that lens. You don't want to be just taking in back patterns like, oh, la-di-da, okay, we're at the zoo now. And okay, we have a monkey. No, it's, okay, what's going on here? So to the zoo, orders an animal. Okay, so we have a person ordering an animal to, okay, I've seen a person ordering an animal, right? So that is how your brain should be working, is taking what you're reading, generalizing it, and seeing if that gives you any signals for when you've done that in the past and what the outcome was. Awesome. So that's how you see the exact pattern in play. Now, last example that I want to give you with extracting these patterns is then how you use that for logical thinking when you're seeing something unique for the first time. All right. So in this last version of the fact pattern, it says Edwin owns a nightclub. And I'll get to your question right after this one, Michael. Edwin owns a nightclub. One night, Michael, all right, Michael's in this one, enters Edwin's nightclub extremely drunk. Michael begins to harass the other guests. Edwin orders the club bouncer, his club bouncer, Dwayne Johnson, to punch Michael and knock him out. Dwayne does so. Michael brings a lawsuit against Edwin, not Dwayne who punched him, but Edwin. What is the basis of his lawsuit, and will he be successful? Okay, do we have a rule for this, or have we seen a question just like this before? No. Here, the pattern is one person has ordered another person to harm the plaintiff. So this is similar yet different from ordering an animal. And you have to then use logical reasoning to see, is this close enough where I'm going to lean to yes or no? Is this different enough where I'm going to say, you know what? Human beings are individual thought, right? And so Dwayne could have either decided to oblige or ignore that, so you can pick your side. So Michael, what side are you picking here? Is this similar to ordering an animal, or and would have the same outcome, or not?
No, like I'm leaning against that because I'm an employment law guy. So this is more like, to me, a vicarious liability type of thing. But now I'm wondering what this was in the course of his work. And then so Edwin orders his club bouncer to knock him out.
And I can tell you right now, Michael, that's exactly what I don't want you to do, is to use your knowledge of practice and then open it up to that kind of like that universe of feelings, right? So it's like, all right, like we've seen what it comes down to. Like we know what this is. You've ordered another human being. So take out real life practice, and this can't be vicarious liability, because vicarious liability is for negligence, right? And this is not negligence. So that's completely ruled out. So basically, is this still going to be a battery?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so there we go. We're going to go with battery. Yes. And we're going to say that this is probably close enough. And that would be like your train of thought of getting there. Right. And by the way, actually, I did just recall vicarious liability is for negligence, but we do have that whole exception. If I'm recalling no, that's actually
It's when they're in the course of duty, but like if they're in the so like it's literally for bouncers and stuff like that. So bouncer has the right to like shove somebody out of the way, but they don't have the right to punch somebody. So like that's why it was like kind of interesting. The fact pattern was sort of almost testing that, but it's like he can't punch somebody and knock him out. So that's either battery or transfer intent.
And
battery.
Really,
it's battery or it's battery or conspiracy to commit battery, I guess. I mean,
and here would be the other good thing, Michael, and everybody, like and we talked about this yesterday a lot. You always want to know what the like classic example of something is. And the classic example of that whole bouncer situation is more so like the bouncer's been hired, the bouncer has been trained, and then on a particular day, the bouncer themselves made some type of decision or judgment call to use force. And then now you're trying to impute that to the owner. That's that classic scenario where this one is different. And you have to see that, right? Where this one is like, no, the owner is actually, or the employer is actually ordering this person to do that. So now we're in a slightly different scenario. This is not really negligence at this point. This is all intentional. So yeah, but all that to say, this is an example of now your pattern that you've used in the past is not 100% spot on, but you can still use it to deduce this logical outcome. So do you remember what your question was, Michael?
So that question would never test something like, like, I mean, even if somebody orders you to do something, you don't have to do it. Like they're like, how do you deduce the fact that they're not testing the fact that, if he told you to jump off a bridge, you wouldn't go do that. If he told you to, like, why are you always going to make that, draw the line there and say, where it says Michael brings a lawsuit against Edwin, what would the basis of his lawsuit and will he be successful? Well, like, yes, Edwin told him to knock him out, but like that the guy who knocked him out is the other guy. So aren't there the people who are just going to say, well, the guy who knocked him out is Dwayne, not.
And that's where you kind of have to use that logical reasoning, Michael. And I think, again, it's kind of like your employment law brain and your practical brain that's kind of blocking you from just kind of like, all right, like the way I think, Michael, is I have been, right, I went to law school in 2014. I graduated top of my class. I have never gone into practice. I've been teaching the bar for 10 years. Like, my brain is wired to just like know what they want and know what are my options for giving them what they want. And that's how you need to think about this. Not like a lawyer, not like an attorney, not like a practical approach. Like, what are my options and where can this go? So when it says like, what is the basis of a lawsuit and will it be successful? He's suing Edwin. So one, I'm automatically throwing out Dwayne, right? So that whole, everything you were saying, that Dwayne's the one that did it, right? Boom, doesn't matter because that's not who I'm focused on. So that's ruled out. Now I'm looking at Edwin. I'm in my world of torts and I'm running through my options. It's either intentional torts, negligence, products liability, defamation, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, a lot of those other ones aren't options. It's really only between maybe those big ones of negligence and intentional torts. And I'm like, there's nothing that was negligent about this. Like, he literally ordered his club bouncer to do this. He did it, and that was the result. So off of that understanding of negligence, that's completely out. So the only thing left here is battery. So it's a logical reasoning, not just based off of like what's speaking to me, but it's like, what are my options? What's the best thing to discuss here? This is the path, as was mentioned yesterday, the path of least resistance. Like, this is what makes the most sense. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is.
Awesome. Good. So let's now move on from patterns, right? But hopefully everybody is really seeing the importance here. And if not, here's a slide just for it. Important. Reflecting and taking notes is the step that few take. Most do a question, simply look at the right answer choice and move on. This is the step that makes the biggest difference between a passer and a non-passer. It's how you learn from each question. And again, I like to have fun with this. It's no different than anything else in life, right? When you hear the guy or the girl like, how do I keep dating this same type of person that's so bad for me, right? Because there's no reflection afterwards to do something different, right? Like, how do I keep having this same issue with my parents, right? But I haven't done anything to talk to them or my kids, right? It's everything in life where you don't reflect on why things are going wrong, you're not going to be able to improve. Now, it's much simpler to do on the bar in those areas of life. So there's optimism there. And you just have to slow down and look at the questions and extract those patterns and reflect like what's going on. So let's now do some practice questions. Oh, we have some more pro tips and then practice questions to see if we can, right, implement everything that we've learned today. But here's some quick pro tips. Become familiar with the common patterns. This translates to quick and accurate analysis, right? There's ways they like to test 2207. There's ways they like to test 2205, right? Like you need to know those typical patterns for those heavily tested topics. You also need to become familiar with the common traps and tricks that they put in, right? How do they typically like to steer me wrong with these different areas of the law? Develop your critical thinking and logical reasoning skills, all right? And then remember, every question has a source, rule, or rules that it is testing. Reverse engineer the question. And this is just to show you that this strategy that I just gave you, the great thing about it is that you'll use a very similar version on the day of the exam. Therefore, you then have something that feels like home, right? You're in that comfort zone, which again is where you want to be. You don't want to be like, all right, now it's the exam and I'm freestyling it. So you see here on the right-hand side, on the day of the exam, everything about this approach remains the same. The only thing is that when it's time to look up your rule, now you are using your memory instead of actually going to your blueprint, okay? So we're gonna do some practice questions, but just to, with this on the screen, and I'm curious to get some feedback and some thought from those that have been implementing other strategies. And I'll start with Perlita because, you were giving me so much on how you were doing it, and then I'll take one or two more volunteers. So Perlita, what would you say is kind of standing out to you as being different than the way that you went about multiple choice before?
The pattern, I never did that before, and looking at how you were doing it now, it reminded me of the saying that everyone says, like, oh, it's just a game, and once you figure out the pattern or something, the game, then it's just like really easy. And I would always be like, well, what is a game? Somebody tell me, because I don't see it. And right now
Yes.
that you did the practice like pattern, I was like, there's the game.
That is the game. Exactly. Awesome. I'm so happy for that light bulb moment because I am the same one that says that like this bar is a game, right? And that's exactly how it's the game where you're not just looking at it surface level, you're going a bit deeper, extracting the pattern and seeing it other places. So for you, the biggest thing that stands out is step 7, which is taking those notes and reflecting on it in that mindset. Awesome. Perfect. Let me go to somebody else. Let's see, one that we haven't called on. Let's go to Stephanie. You there, Stephanie?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. So I want to ask you before I go into like what stood out to you, I want to go specifically like in doing your questions before, would you use your rules to have them by your side prior to?
Actually, no, I was going based off of like what I already knew. And then
Uh-huh.
I would go through once I would get the question wrong, I
Yeah.
would look at the description as to why I got it wrong and then look up the rule and then understand like, okay, I see where I went wrong and this is how the rule is actually being applied. And this
Yep.
is why I got it wrong. But not
So
that way.
So now that, you've gotten at least now this first time, maybe you've heard it before, but you've gotten this information that like, there's a whole nother way of doing it. And I'm giving you the okay to have your rule by your side. I'm curious, like, what is your initial impression of doing it that way? Does that sound like, oh, that sounds like the better way? Do you have a bit of hesitation because you're so used to not using that? Like, yeah, what's your initial thought?
I think for me, I think that's a lot better only because it allows me to look at the question and the facts of the question a little
Mm-hmm.
bit differently when I'm
Mm-hmm.
applying it, and not necessarily using my, like you were saying earlier, like using my past recollection of the
Yes.
rule, and just in case if I get it wrong, and knowing that any little word or anything can like basically destroy the whole answer
Analysis.
choice, yeah, and
Yeah,
analysis.
exactly. And that's just like the worst thing where it's just like, again, like we are not at the in week 2, week 3, at the point where we should be memorizing all these rules. And again, a lot of times we're a little optimistic as to how much we remember. So let's go grab that rule, have it by our side. And then again, now with that, can I get this answer correct? And chances are we're going to still get a lot of questions wrong, but now we know why we're getting it wrong. And it's not simply because, and it's not, yeah, we didn't memorize the rule. So we get to really, really hone in on our weakness when we do this. The last analogy that I'll give, and you guys all know I love cooking. So yeah, Stephanie, do you like to cook? Is there anything, any
Oh,
kind
I
of,
love to cook. My family's from Louisiana, so
okay, there we go. My
I'm used
family is
to it.
Creole. So
Oh,
yeah, I got
mine
family.
too.
There
Yeah.
we go. Okay, so what? You cooking gumbo or what?
Oh, I cook gumbo. I cook etouffee. I cook succotash,
Okay.
shrimp creole,
So
whatever.
So for all those that don't know, those are all some pretty complicated dishes, right? If you have never
Yes.
made them before, there's a lot of love, labor, a lot of steps. So my question to you, Stephanie, is when it's the first time that you're making gumbo, are you going to have that recipe by your side?
Um, no, I had my grandmother by my
Well,
side.
okay, so look, you got the hack. Well, you got grandma in the kitchen. That's different, but she is the recipe exactly. So the point is, everybody, is that like, yeah, when you're cooking a brand new dish for the first time and you're trying to really get good at it, right? Like, have that recipe by your side. Follow that, right? Tweak that recipe if you realize you want to change some things, and then you do that recipe over and over and over. And then guess what? Before you know it, you have memorized that, and now you're in the kitchen and you're making everything without having to use any help, any assistance, no grandma, no iPad open with the recipe. But again, it's like appreciate the steps, and then that's how you master it. That was awesome. Thank you for that, Stephanie. All right, so let's go through some practice questions where now you guys can hopefully see all of this in action and see the value of it. Okay, so let me go ahead and go to Joan. Joan,
Hello.
hello. Uh-oh, what happened? Oh, there we
Wait.
go. I can hear you. My screen just went black for a second. All right, Joan, go ahead and read. Or first off, start with the answer choices. Skim the answer choices and tell me if you can figure out what subject this is. And then within that subject, if you have any idea of some possible topics that might be at play.
So it looks like this is a contract question. And then it looks like you're talking about the like enforceability. So maybe if it's like a valid contract or not.
Okay, so we
Um,
have contracts. We know we're in contracts, and maybe some like enforceability. Is it valid? Okay. And don't upset, like Joan just did that perfectly. Don't obsess in this phase, right? This is not like, oh, I need to know exactly what it is, just to ground yourself. Because on the bar exam, as some of us know, right, I think we have some first time takers in here as well. You have a random assortment of questions. So this is just to even let you know what subject you're in. But if you get lucky, you could pinpoint the exact topic. But all right, Joan, go ahead now and read the actual question and go through it as slow as possible. Really focus on that reading comprehension.
on June 1st, a wholesale company received a purchase order form from a retailer in which the latter ordered 1,000 anti-recoil widgets for delivery no later than August 30th at a delivered total price of $10,000 as quoted in the wholesale company's current catalog. Okay. Both parties are merchants with respect to widgets of all types. On June 2nd, the wholesale company mailed to the retailer its own form, across the top of which the wholesale company's president had written, "We are pleased to accept your order." This form contained the same terms as the retailer's form except for an additional printed clause in the wholesale company's form that provided for a maximum liability of $100 for any breach of contract by the wholesale company. As of June 5th, when the retailer received the wholesale company's acceptance form, which of the following is an accurate statement concerning the legal relationship between the wholesale company and the retailer?
Awesome. Okay. So again, mini essays, right? This is a whole fact pattern. So you have, let me stop sharing for a second so you guys can see my screen, right? I might have not written this big enough, but hope you can see it. I have R is the buyer, and then WC is the seller. All right. And then it's 1,000 widgets, and R was the offeror. They sent the offer to the, what did they call them? I put WC. What was that short for? Wholesale company. Yeah. So that was a quick example of what I'm telling you of put pen to paper as I'm reading just to organize what's going on. All right. Because they even are giving it to you in a little bit of a convoluted way. Like the wholesale company received from these people a purchase order. I'm going to reorganize that. Okay. So retailer sent wholesale company purchase order form for 1,000. Okay. Got it. So after that, Joan, can you give me a little bit of a summary of some of the key facts that, are happening here, and kind of, we always want to say, like, where's the fact pattern taking us? So like, what kind of is seemingly the issue that is almost going to like happen at some point?
Yeah, so it looks like there's a sale between, or that they're trying to have a sale and like make a contract for a sale, but there was a written clause on June 2nd that the wholesale company mailed to the retailer. And so I think that clause will be the issue to see if it's like as a part of the contract or not.
Perfect. Perfect. So everybody, that's step number one. What I said is, what is the key issue? The key issue really here then is like, did they enter into a contract? That's number one. And then two, is that additional clause going to be included? That is perfection. And you have to figure out, what does this come down to? Good. And also two, can you summarize what is that clause just so we know what it is?
Yeah, so it looks like that there is an additional printed clause for the maximum liability for the breach of the contract.
And how would you summarize that, right? You could use some of those same words, but in short, this is a clause that's doing what?
That's trying to restrict or like, I guess, change the liability.
Yeah,
Yeah,
perfect.
for the
Like a
wholesale.
restriction on liability, a limitation
Yes.
on liability, right? Exactly. We want to do that so we can put it into our own words, and then all right, I'm dealing with that. So a limitation on liability. Perfect. All right. Now the next step, right? So now at this point, we have skimmed the answer choices. We know those contracts. We have read the question gingerly and attentively. Now we have to reverse engineer the question. So Joan, I'm not sure how refreshed you are on contracts, but can you figure out what is the specific topic and subject being tested here? Is anything ringing a bell?
I think I'm not that refreshed on contracts, but I would assume just like by reading the question and the answer that it's like, I guess the like enforceability of a contract for the sale of like, it looks like it's widgets, so like a sale of goods, which might include the UCC.
Okay. All right. So so you're in the right, on the right freeway, but we're not at the right destination yet. So let's see if we can phone a friend. Does anybody know the specific rule being tested here? Go ahead and feel free to shout it out. What is the specific?
Battle of the Forms.
Yeah, Augustus, this is Battle of the Forms. This is 2207, right? And so again, Joan, she hasn't seen this in quite some time. So it's just like, all right, this happens in studying. So now you have to get a second, like if you're doing this question, Joan, it's like, I don't know what rule this is. So this is kind of just like, all right, like something did not go all the way correct on Learn Day where I was supposed to relearn all of this material. So for you, this would be a situation if you're on your own. All right, let me go to the answer choice. Let me just really dive deep into learning this, extracting the pattern, okay? But we're doing a question right now today together, so we'll still go through this as if you did at least know it was 2207. So what topic is being tested? Let's go to the next slide here. 2207, Battle of the Forms. Now, I already know the answer to this, but just to go through the formalities of how you would do it on your own, you would ask yourself, do I remember this rule fully and accurately? Joan, do you remember this rule fully and accurately?
No.
No. So of course I'm not going to be able to answer this question. And if so, it's going to be all wonky because I don't remember the rule. So I got to go to my rule. This is a complicated rule, but with Legally Fit, we try to simplify rules to make it really easy. And I think we've done that pretty well here in this short little rule paragraph. So go ahead and read that rule for me, Joan.
Per 2207, a contract is formed when the offeree's response includes additional terms that are not made to be expressly conditional. The additional term will include in the contract if the offeror expressly assented to the term or both parties are merchants. However, the both parties are merchants rule cannot be used to add the term one if the original offer limited acceptance to its terms, or two, the new term materially alters the contract, or three, the offeror expressly rejected the new term.
Perfect. All right. So I want you to take no more than 2 minutes, and I want you to run through this fact pattern with this rule, and I want to know what your individual thought was. So everybody take 2 minutes, and essentially you're asking yourself two questions. One, was a contract formed? And then the second question is, will the limitation liability term be added? Will the limitation liability term be added? Okay, so literally 2 minutes. And again, you have your rule, apply this rule to answer those questions. And then Joan, as my assistant with this question, you can let me know when you have your answer and we'll begin.
Okay. I think I have an answer. I'm not sure if it's correct, but I think I have an answer.
There we go. And that's totally fine, right? And that's what I want you to remember during bar prep, everybody, is that like we have to learn how to be wrong, right? Like we have to enjoy it and be okay with it and realize like, hey, like get a question wrong one time, cool. Like tricky question, I learned from it. But if I get that same question or a similar question wrong again, that's where it's a problem. So with that said, Joan, what do you think? Is a contract formed here?
I think that there is a contract.
Okay. And then do you think the limitation liability clause will be added?
I'm gonna say no.
Okay. So yes, you're going with yes, it's formed, and we're going with no, right, on the limitation liability. So if you're doing this on your own, what you would now do is go into the answer choices, find the one that looks and matches this the best, and then you would see if you got it right. And if you got it wrong, you would see exactly where you went wrong. So, and if you got it right, then you got it right. So let's walk through this, right? So first off, it says a contract is in fact formed when the offeree's response includes additional terms that are not made to be expressly conditional, right? So then we can, from this, assume the opposite, that when it is made to be expressly conditional, a contract is not immediately formed. So the question here, Joan, is when the wholesale company said, we are pleased to accept your offer, did they make that expressly conditional?
It does not sound conditional.
And just give me at least one line. What is your reasoning of why that does not sound conditional?
Because it didn't say only if or if, it just says we are pleased to accept your order, full stop.
Perfection. Not only was that good of just supporting your thought, I will also give you the confirmation that that is an accurate train of thought. So yes, this is not expressly conditional. You are correct that this would be 22072. This would be acceptance. And so a contract is formed. Perfect. So now we have to deal with the additional term. It says it will be added if one, both parties are merchants, excuse me, if one, there was express assent to the additional term, or if both parties are merchants. So first we ask ourselves, did the retailer expressly assent to this limitation liability clause?
No.
There's no facts to say it, so I can't assume it. Great. Next, are both parties merchants here?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so then that leans us towards that the term should be added. However, there are 3 exceptions that if one of these exceptions applies, then you can no longer use the both parties are merchants rule. So one is if the original offer limited acceptance to its terms. Do we have any facts that the retailers offer limited acceptance to its terms?
No.
Nope. Cool. Next, the new term materially alters the contract. Materially alters is when there's either a surprise or hardship. It's not a bright line test. This is really you having to kind of get a sense of that rule and know what typically satisfies this rule and what doesn't. So what is your gut telling you here? Is this something, this maximum liability clause, is this something that you would deem to materially alter the contract or not?
I believe so, just because $100 compared to 10,000 is a big jump. And so that's why I would lean to like, yes, it materially alters the contract.
Okay. And then lastly, did the offeror expressly reject the new term?
No, they did not.
Okay. So based off of everything you've done, some things should be very clear. Some things should be kind of questiony, right? So you have your outcome here. And then now, right, like what is it now hinging on? What's like the grayest aspect of your analysis?
If the maximum liability, if that inclusion materially alters the contract.
Perfection. Everybody, I hope we're really, really appreciating how Joan is going through this question, because this is exactly what you want to do. Not only have we looked up our rule, done a full analysis, we've identified the critical key question, not just that it's 2207, but even within 2207, what this is ultimately going to come down to. That is the type of stuff that you're then looking for in your answer choices to reflect, right? And look how structured our analysis was. I have not given Joan any freedom or ability even to kind of go into like, yeah, you know, so I think this is going to be here because of this or that. It's very structured. Here's the question. What's being tested, right? Augusta's helped us out. This is 2207. What's our rule? Here's our analysis, etc. So let's continue. So the answer is contract formed because there is no expressly conditional language in the response form, and the term is unlikely to be added because a liability limitation clause materially alters the contract. That's the answer we're coming up with. So now we go into the answer choices to see which one best matches what we came up with. And Joan, what are we going to go ahead and select here?
I think D is the best choice of these.
All right. So D, there is an enforceable contract whose terms do not include the liability limitation clause in the wholesale company's form. So look at that, like literally something that perfectly matches. And the correct answer is D. Right. This is not a simple area of law. 2207 is one of the more complicated topics within contracts. And look how that formula and that strategy has guided us to not only getting the right answer here, but actually better understanding 2207 and its rule. Okay, but we're not done, Joan, right? So we've done all the steps perfectly so far, and now we have to finish it off, because this is what happens, right? Like we've done all this and like, all right, great, I'm ready to move on to the next one. No, we have to reflect and take notes. This is, as Perlita was saying, this is how we learn the game. So what is the pattern here? So we practiced this once before with Michael. Can you take now this fact pattern and generalize it and dumb it down to where you have a pattern that we can apply for future scenarios?
When two merchants send each other forms, a valid contract can be formed, but additional terms may not be part of that contract if they materially alter the contract. Kind of long.
Okay. Yeah, and it's good. And sometimes it is long, but it also has to be something that's very useful. So for time purposes, I won't let you do it again, but extracting patterns is a skill that you will get better at as you go. And so here, take a look at the one that I came up with. So the pattern was offeror sends an offer for goods. Offeree responds with their own form that includes an additional term. And then here, what was important in part of your analysis, Joan, was that the offeree's response did not contain any language making their acceptance expressly conditional. Like that was key to why a contract was formed. So I want to remember that. Like here, like I'm giving myself, Joan, that confirmation that I was right, that when they included a new term, but they don't include any language, like in addition to it, then that means it's not expressly conditional. Okay. And then the parties just start performing, right? So that was the entire pattern. And again, it's pretty long, but at least in this way, it's like pretty clear. There's an offer, there was a response with an additional term, and then that response was very passive and didn't have any additional language to make it expressly conditional. And then the parties just started performing. What are my notes? Under the UCC, when an offeree's response form includes an additional term and the response does not include any language expressing requirement to include the additional term, then the response was not made to be expressly conditional, and the response is treated as an acceptance, which forms a contract. The other thing that I'm taking away from this, Joan, that's really important is like the mental note that a liability limitation clause is a type of clause deemed to materially alter a contract. So this is what I talked about as far as taking a stance and then adjusting your gut feeling. So we said that it was gray. Like she's like, I haven't seen limitation liability clause before, but I'm leaning towards this does materially alter. Well, now in the future, when she sees liability limitation, it's no longer gray. Based off of what she has now just learned, that's a quick and easy answer. And now she also has a baseline to compare other types of clauses to. So she can say, is this like a limitation on liability clause, or is this dislike a liability limitation clause, etc.? So that's how that works. Like this now becomes part of your library of understanding. All right. Are we ready to move on from this question, Joan?
Yes, thank you. That was very helpful.
Perfect. Thank you. That was really good. And again, hopefully we all got that. And we have 2 more questions for all those that I know are looking at the clock. I know it's in the evening time, but I promise you, let's stay to the end because these next 2 questions are going to be just as beneficial. All right. So can I get a volunteer for question number 2? Can I get a volunteer for question number 2? Somebody in the... All right, no volunteer. So I'm gonna have to call on somebody. Let me go with you, Augustus. You still with me?
Yes, I am.
All right, perfect. Okay, so same approach. We start off by skimming the answer choices. When you skim the answer choices, what subject, and if you can tell, what topic does it look like we have here?
Okay, from the answer choices, this is also contracts.
Good.
And
Anything else standing out?
it's testing the parole evidence rule.
Okay, and we don't want to be 100%, right? We never want to leave the answer choices saying, oh, they're testing this, and it's just a good habit, because if you have then that mindset, you're not leaving yourself any room for being incorrect. And then now you'll be all thrown off in reading the question. So you want to have more so the mindset that this is contracts and okay, maybe this is parole evidence. All right, go ahead and read the question for us, please.
Okay, it says a landowner and a contractor entered into a written agreement, into a written contract under which the contractor agreed to build a building and pave an adjacent sidewalk for the landowner at the price of $200,000. Later, while construction was proceeding, the landowner and the contractor entered into an oral modification under which the contractor was not obligated to pave the sidewalk, but would still be entitled to the $200,000 upon completion. The contractor completed the building. The landowner afterwards, after discussions with his landscaper, demanded that the contractor pave the adjacent sidewalk. The contractor refused. Has the contractor breached the contract?
Okay. First thing we need to do to make this simple, everybody, is get that reading comprehension down. All right. So we had the original contract. What was the original contract for?
That they pave the adjacent sidewalk and build a building for $200,000.
Okay. So the original contract was that the landowner would pay $200,000 and that the landscaper would pay would, what was it, build the building? Yeah,
build a building and pave the sidewalks at that price.
building plus pave sidewalks, right? Then it says we had an oral modification where what happened?
Where he discharged his duty to pave the sidewalk, but would still be entitled to full payment upon completion of the building.
All right, so now it's $200K for building only. And then summarize for me, Augustus, what happened right after that modification?
After the modification, the landowner entered subsequent discussions with his landscaper and then made a demand that the sidewalk be paved for the full amount to be paid.
Yeah, so not that the full amount to be paid, that wasn't the issue. It wasn't the landowner saying the full amount because the landowner is the one paying. What did the landowner basically do here? Try it again.
He tried to modify the modification.
Yeah, and basically say what?
Pave the sidewalk, or
yeah, exactly. And what I want you to do, and what I try to get all my students to do, is to really humanize the fact pattern so you can make it a little lighter and see it for what it is, right? Which is, there was a contract, there was a modification where the landowner basically got gypped, right? Like now you're paying the same amount for less work, right? Same amount for less work. And then the landowner was like, actually, I changed my mind. Like, no, I want you to pave this. So I even want that kind of part of your summary, right? Where the person who agreed to the modification is later changing their mind and essentially wanting to go back to the original agreement, because that's what it is. That the paved sidewalk didn't come out of nowhere. That was going back to the original agreement. So now we have to see whether or not, right? Like it says here, the contractor refused. Has the contractor breached? Well, we have to have a more specific issue here. So what's actually going to be the critical issue here, Augustus, as to whether the contractor has breached their contract?
I would say if there was like proper consideration for the modification.
Okay, and we could even simplify it for now of, was there a valid modification? And now you're getting into your rule a little bit, which is great. You remember your rule. But yes, this comes down to whether there's a valid modification. So now what you have done is accurately reversed engineered the question, which is, again, why I told you a second ago, you don't want to be too sure of yourself when skimming the answer choices, because this is, in fact, not a parole evidence rule question. This is, correct, in fact, yes, a modification question. So issue is modification, right? You already remember your rule a little bit, right? But here's a great reason why you want to look up your rule, because it's more than just additional consideration for common law. You also have that whole rule around whether it needs to be in writing. And there's also exceptions, but I will say the writing component doesn't actually end up coming into play, but you do have exceptions to your additional consideration rule. So the rule here says, under the common law, a modification acts as a new contract and are only valid if there is additional or new consideration for both parties. Modern courts allow modification of a common law contract without new consideration if the modification is fair and equitable in light of unforeseen circumstances. A common law contract may be modified without consideration if the modification was a compromise of an honest dispute about the legal duty owed. So what we have here is a general rule saying you need new consideration, but you have two exceptions to where the modification can still be valid even if there is no additional consideration. I want everybody to put their answer in the chat. I want you to look at these rules, the general rule and the two exceptions, and I want you to put valid modification or invalid modification. I want to see everybody's analysis based off of this rule and two exceptions. Either put valid modification or invalid modification. Okay. Augustus has started us off. Make sure you don't lean on anybody's answer. Augustus could be right, could be wrong. Okay. Joan said invalid modification too. Okay. All right, we'll give this just one more minute. Okay, we got the third one. We got 3 in a row. Invalid, invalid, invalid. Stephanie says invalid. Now they are coming in. Invalid. Good. All right. So let's go through this answer choice. 1, what's easy? What's the easiest part of this analysis, Augustus?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question? What do you mean?
Yeah, there's a general rule we have to analyze, and then 2 exceptions. What's the easiest? Or there's actually 2 easy analysis here, and maybe you consider all 3 of them easy answers. But yeah, like walk me through. Like, is it a toss up as to whether there was additional consideration here?
Not really.
Not at all. Exactly.
Yeah.
This is clearly no additional consideration.
Yes.
Here, the landscaper got additional consideration that he has less work, but the landowner has to pay the same amount. There's no consideration for the landowner. Absolutely. Easy peasy. Closed book. No additional consideration. So the general rule is not met. The only way this modification will be valid in favor of the landscaper is if
there were unforeseen circumstances.
And are there any facts of and then this is what could throw some people off, right? Like, oh, it'd be fair and equitable. And right, this is why I say don't analyze your emotion, right? As you see here, I've not even gotten into all this stuff around like, man, but they agreed to it, right? Because your emotion could lead you here to find for the landscaper. You're like, well, I mean, they agreed to do the modification, right? Like nobody put a gun to the landowner's head, and then now the landowner wants to go back on that. But that's not part of our analysis, and that could throw you off if you have too much of that emotion. You might say it is fair and equitable, but it says fair and equitable in light of unforeseen circumstances. Are there any unforeseen circumstances, Augustus, for why he could not do the sidewalk?
Not in this scenario.
Exactly. So don't let your emotions get the best of you. Analyze your rule. Here, there's no unforeseen circumstances. Boom. Next question. It can be modified without consideration if there was a compromise of an honest dispute. Was there any honest dispute as to what was owed here?
None.
No. Honest dispute as to what is owed is more so like, oh, there's like, we truly aren't sure how much you owe, so we decide that it's just going to be $500, you know, things like that, where it's an honest dispute. That's not the case here. So we're going with invalid modification. That is the answer. No modification because no consideration and no exception applies. Augustus, what is the answer choice that best matches our analysis?
That'd be D.
And look at that. We're 2 for 2. And look how quick and easy that was, right? Scan the answer choices, boom, beeline it to D. I've given Augustus no time to second guess himself, right? We have done the analysis, we've done the hard work, and we're going straight into it. So that is how the system works, right? And you're seeing it in action. But again, we're not done yet. We still need to extract the pattern or notes. Go ahead, Augustus, give it your first stab at trying to generalize this fact pattern into a pattern that you can use for later questions.
So if you want to create a pattern for the future, we could say where there is a contract governed by common law and there are modifications, the modifications have to be either in writing, in lieu of writing in the where there's no writing, it would still be valid if there's an honest dispute made in good faith between the parties. And if
Okay.
that doesn't exist, um, what was the last one? I can't
The other
remember.
one was like if it's fair and equitable in light of unforeseen circumstances.
Yes, if there are unforeseen circumstances that will warrant a modification, then a modification would not require any consideration to be valid.
Okay, so this is good, but that's really just like a restatement of the rules in a consolidated way. So here's another thing to think about, Augustus, and this is back to what I'm saying about playing the game, right? Where did they try to trip you up here? Like you have to not only do questions and avoid the traps, you have to see the traps and realize them so you can see them again. So what was essentially the trap? Like where did most students go wrong here and the reason why?
That it wasn't written.
Not that it wasn't written, right?
No, like
And
that's the trap. That's the trap into getting
yeah,
him to
yeah.
answer B.
And actually, I will say that like that could have been the trap too, but it would have come to the same outcome. The fact that it wasn't written, you would say, oh, it's not a valid modification. Let me see if that was one of the answer choices. Yeah.
B.
So I do like that one, Michael, but there's something else that I think is a trap here that I want to take away from as like ultimately my pattern and my summary of this question. Right. And here's what it is, right? Me and Michael enter into a contract. We modify that contract. We modify that contract in favor of Michael only. I no longer want to honor that modification. I am allowed to do that. That is the pattern here, right? Which I want to take and accept because that is where somebody could go array if they don't find themselves structured in the rules that you think, oh, you can't go back on a modification that you agreed to, but in fact, you can. So the pattern here is you have two parties who agree to a modification, but it only benefits one party. The disadvantaged party is allowed to renege on that modification. That's my takeaway. So that when I see this again and I'm in that situation, right, I know that that's a possibility. I still have to consider the exceptions, of course, but I'm at least gaining comfort with somebody can back out of a modification. So do you see the difference, Augustus, in that type of takeaway that I'm doing?
Yeah, I did.
Perfect. So what I'm doing there is not just a recollection of the rule, but for me, I'm preparing myself for, again, that like same scenario that's tugging at those same heartstrings that this question was trying to do. So here's the pattern notes. A and B enter into a contract. Parties later agree to modify in a way that only benefits one party. Yep, there we go. And that's how much I've done this, where it's like I remember my pattern to where it came out the same. And then at the bottom, right, that was the version that you gave, Augustus, right, where I kind of did my recollection of my rule, right, that common law requires consideration. If one party agrees to modify, they can get out of it if they didn't receive any consideration. And then you brought in also the exceptions. So that's cool too. But let's remember that top part. All right. We have our.
Can I ask you a quick question about that last question?
Yeah.
If there would have been a line that said they entered into an oral modification under which the contractor was not obligated to pave the sidewalk, but still be entitled to 200 upon completion. And then there was a writing, but the writing would just said, it didn't have any consideration, but the writing just said each of them signed the modification. So now you still don't have any information as to consideration, but you have a writing. It still wouldn't be valid because there's no consideration.
Let's, for time purposes, and I want to get everybody out of here, let's come back to that because we're basically kind of doing like a change of the facts and then therefore a change of the analysis type of question. So let's hold off on that one to the end. Let's do this last question so I can get everybody out of here and then I'll stick around for that.
Okay, sorry.
All right, cool, no worries. All right, so question 3, everybody. I'm no longer going to hold your hand through this. It simply says here 2 minutes to answer. I'm putting the clock on. All right, what time is it? 7:33, 2 minutes. Use everything that we've learned so far as your system, how you go through things, right? Try to answer this one correctly on your own now and put the answer choice in the chat. and directly message it to me. So that way we're not leaning on anybody else's answer choices. Directly message me your answer. Hey, I got 2 answers in, waiting on a few more. We are at more than 2 minutes, so let's start giving me those answer choices. Okay, and I'll wait for one more. Joan, you changing it up? Okay. All right, so we do not have a unanimous answer on this question, right? Let's walk through this really quickly. A buyer sent a signed letter to a seller that stated, ship 100 boxes of nails at $3 per box, right? So a buyer is basically sending a purchase form of 100 boxes of nails at $3 per box, okay? The seller mailed the buyer a signed form acknowledging that a signed form acknowledgement that agreed to the buyer's terms and stated on the reverse side, disputes regarding quality shall be arbitrated. Joan, just reading those first 2 sentences alone, what's ringing off? What's the alarm that's going off right now?
It sounds like they're trying to modify the terms of the contract.
Oh, okay. So Joan, you're seeing this a little, try again. Like you're not catching the pattern that we've seen before. So what does this more so look like?
Oh, so then maybe it's the form. So it kind of reminds me of 2207.
Yeah, this is the 2. Okay, so that is what we're saying, right? Of the catching the patterns. So we did question 1, but we're not seeing that this is very similar in that you have, right? And I'll get into that in a second, but this is triggering right there, 2207. The buyer did not reply to the seller's acknowledgement and the seller shipped the nails. When the buyer received the nails, it found their quality to be unsatisfactory and sued for breach of warranty. The seller's asked an attorney whether the party's contract requires an arbitration of the buyer's claim. So Joan, this is the pattern we took away. This is directly from slide number 1. Offeror sends offer for goods. We have that. Offeree responds with their own form that includes an additional term. We also have that. But here, what's the additional term?
Disputes must be arbitrated. Disputes of quality must be arbitrated.
Good. So basically arbitration over the courts. Yes, it's an arbitration clause. Good. So we have their own form because it says they sent an acknowledgement form and then it had this additional clause. So boom, we have that. Then the offeree's response did not contain any language making it expressly conditional. Did it have any other language outside of the clause itself?
No, that was the only additional language.
Exactly. So we have that same scenario of no additional language connected to it. And then what? The parties just start performing. So we literally, boom, again, we have that same exact pattern. All right. Under the UCC, when an offeree's response form includes an additional term and it does not include any language, that means that the response was made not to be expressly conditional, which means it's treated as an acceptance. And then we said a limitation liability clause is the type of clause deemed to materially alter the contract. So just using this pattern and seeing this, this basically has all of the same facts. And now the only thing that's unique is that when you got down to the exception for both parties or merchants, the question now, Joan, is, does an arbitration clause, what do you think? Does that materially alter the contract or not?
Yes, I think it's similar enough to the liability limitation that it would materially
Perfect.
alter the contract.
And I love how you use that to compare it to what you know and like, yep, I'm going to find that to be similar enough. So I'm leaning towards yes. So then now, right, for all those that put C, that is the correct answer. Okay. Oops. A contract, it says what, and the question here is the seller has asked an attorney, what is the best advice you can give? All right. A contract was formed when the seller mailed this acknowledgement form, and the court must decide whether the arbitration term should be excluded as a material alteration. So it doesn't give you that exact outcome, Joan, but it's still consistent because all it's saying is the court is going to decide whether it materially alters, but it's actually going to that, right? What we know this comes down to part of the rule. For those that put B, a contract was formed when the seller mailed his acknowledgement form and the arbitration term became part of the contract. That means you concluded that this does not materially alter the contract, and that's fine. If you put B, all you need to simply do is realign. And what I could tell you is that 10 times out of 10, arbitration clauses are deemed to materially alter the contract. This one didn't give us the satisfying answer choice that said that it does, but it made B wrong, and then it chose the answer choice that says the court must decide. But what I can tell you is knowing that arbitration clauses should materially alter the contract, that's where C becomes the better answer. Okay. So Joe, I want to specifically go to you on this one. So what is your thought and your impression right now, right? That we did question 1 together, but we didn't initially see this in question 3.
Yeah, I think I had maybe still had the last question about modification in my mind. And so I just assumed that this would also relate to that. So I think I have to just definitely be better about the patterns and trying to really notice when the pattern shows up again, not just be primed by the previous question.
Good. Okay. So it's a little bit of that, we kind of thought it was going one way or the other. So for Joan and hopefully everybody here, this is intended to be on my end, the big reveal at the end of this lesson, which is, right, look how in this short time frame of doing question 1, 2, and 3, we did question 1. We only did 1 question in between, and then we did question 3, and only half of us got the correct answer choice here. And so that means there's still room for improvement on either both extracting the pattern or applying the pattern in future questions. And this is what I'm trying to show you all is the key to success with the MBE, that as you go through questions, you need to perfect that in order to have your work product and all that time you're putting in actually serve you well on the day of the exam. Right. But this is where I see so many students going wrong, where they're getting the same questions wrong, the same type of questions wrong, because they're not either, again, extracting the pattern or applying it when it's then time. So I hope everybody really sits with that takeaway for them regarding this, because yeah, again, 5 minutes ago we did this question, but half of us either didn't see it or didn't analyze it correctly. When literally, like, when you get to the more complex questions, it's again harder to see it, but take out the boxes of nails versus the anti-recoil widgets. Take out the $3 per box compared to the $1,000 or whatever it was before. Switch out the liability limitation clause for right, all this detail that it kind of disguises it from being the same, but in reality is. So that is the end of the session. Before we finish today, and I'm going to start off with Joan, and I'll just take one other volunteer. Joan, what is your biggest takeaway from today's MBE workshop on like what you're going to be focusing on as you get ready for studying?
Definitely going to focus on like trying to notice the patterns in different scenarios, because I think that would just make it simpler going forward.
Good. So boom, big focus on extracting those patterns. And I'm going to also bring up the whole formula, because I know that one's super top of mind as we are in that. And I did that same thing I did the other day. Let me bring it back up. But while we do that, Karen, did you have a main takeaway?
Yes, actually, it was pretty interesting to see these questions. That pretty much, I think 1 and 3 were the same kind of like type of thing, answering the different terms in the contract. So it was interesting. So my main takeaway, and also because of the bar exam, I kind of freaked out when I was reading this last third question, and then you just said it. It's kind of like new terms to me, and I think that's what happened at the exam. Like there's a lot of new words, and kind of like mental block when I saw this. Not mental
Yeah.
block, like freaking out. Like I don't know this term. What is this supposed to mean? So definitely pay more attention. I think that the taking notes is so important. Like right now, I just took a screenshot and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go back to my screenshot. So yeah, totally
Good.
worth it.
Awesome. So yeah, I want to talk about both of those. Those are really two good takeaways. That yeah, notice how like my brain doesn't get caught up at all on anti-recoil widgets. Like, what the hell is an anti-recoil widget? Like, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. Like, okay, so that's what they're buying. You keep going. And then the next one is boxes of nails. Like, you really have to keep your mind so disciplined and not kind of go on the tangents, right? We got to keep our ADD minds, and we all fall somewhere on that spectrum of just like our brain wandering to different things or getting caught up with something. And it's like, no, okay, so all right, Byron, okay, where's the question taking me? And when you focus on the patterns of things, that allows you to be less impacted by some of that nuance, right? You're taking it in, but you're not being affected by it. And then, yeah, the second one, as you take notes of these questions, especially in your practice, that really advances your reading comprehension and your ability to see the patterns and understand the question. So really write and take notes down. Awesome. All right. And let's do one last one. I just feel like it's, an obligation now that we got Stephanie, we got to know Stephanie's grandma. We know she cooks gumbo on etouffee. Stephanie, we got to hear what your takeaway is from today too.
My takeaway is definitely one thing that I know that I tend to do a lot is I read through the fact pattern really quickly. And I do you know I tend to not focus on the intricate details as much, and then when I get to the answer choices I'm like freaking lost. So that's something I know I need to definitely take time with. And then of course pulling out and understanding the patterns, that is another thing I need to do. And I didn't even realize that there were patterns, and
Mhm.
making sure that I read the rules as I'm going through my MBE practice questions. So I truly enjoyed this session. It's definitely helped me. And I'm going to use it while I study now. So I
There we
appreciate it.
go.
Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. You're so welcome. And hopefully that gives you and everybody else some excitement to get back into these questions, right? Because now it's like, all right, I got this new strategy that's going to really help me move the needle. So awesome job, everybody. I'll go ahead and excuse everybody. Really appreciate you guys putting in a little bit more time than probably expected. And most of you guys stayed all the way to the end. So I'm glad to see that. And I really hope this helps you guys be successful on the MBE portion of the exam. For all those interested in signing up for the program, we will send you links. There's also consultations if you want to have conversations to peel back more specifically for you, what you need to be doing in order to improve. But until then, have a great rest of your evening and good luck with the upcoming bar exam.
Thank you, Dee.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome, Stephanie. And Stephanie, I know you said you're from Louisiana. Are you taking the California bar exam, or are you
Well,
taking the?
my family's from Louisiana, but I am taking the California bar exam. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you're out here. Awesome. All
Yeah.
right. So yeah, we'll have to have some conversations after you finish all this of, do you got any Creole
Absolutely.
restaurants, in the city that you guys go to, all that kind of fun stuff.
Oh yeah, I'm currently in San Diego right now. So the one I like to go to is Louisiana Purchase.
Ah,
Really, really
okay.
good. Yeah, so if anyone is looking for any Creole food, I would go there.
There
Try
we go.
that.
I know all the spots in LA, but I have not known the ones in San Diego. So I'm gonna have to put that on the
Yeah.
list.
Yes, yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, good luck, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Yeah. Do you already know what bar prep program you're taking?
Barbary.
Okay, and you're just gonna do the self-study with them again?
I think so, but I always feel like if I need some additional like assistance, I'm more than happy to get like another program, or you know, have some type of like a cross training, as you will.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
yeah, I would definitely look a little. Have you seen or heard anything or know anybody that has taken our program?
I do. One of my coworkers actually, she took you guys, and I believe she actually passed the bar. But
Mhm.
she took you guys this last time for the February bar, and I believe she passed. So
Awesome. What was her
yeah.
name? Do you know?
Cassandra?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yep.
Cassandra. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she just passed with this. Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
so yeah, this is really I would say like something I would consider if I was in your shoes of retaking it, and I've already taken Barbary. I took Barbary when I was in bar prep. And what you're going to get with our program is one, which we didn't really touch on in this session, is a really, really good understanding of the law, right? And as I mentioned in the beginning of this session, half of this battle is really understanding the law and not just having a surface level understanding. But then after that, which you can attest to today, you have to know not just, what to do, but how to do it. So like all the strategy that we give. So we have essay strategy, PT strategy, multiple choice. So that way you can really maximize your time, while you're studying. So yeah, feel free to talk to
Exactly.
Cassandra. Feel free to reach out to us. But yeah, based off of the session today and you appreciating what you learned, that typically is a sign that you would be a good fit for the program.
Absolutely. And I love the hands-on approach too. So that really helps, because I know Barbary's not really hands-on at the moment. It's
Exactly.
more so look at a video and answer questions. And it's like, okay, but I still don't know what I'm doing.
Exactly. So we do not only do we have like orientation where we go through all these strategies, but we do workshops anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week in this live group setting. So exactly, you have some guidance, some
Okay.
assistance, and all
That
those
would be
things.
very
So
helpful. Yeah, that's very, very helpful.
here, let me put up the link for you so you can just click on the QR code and get more information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Will it be
Uh,
on in the group, the chat, or?
let's see if it was already. Monique, did you place it in the chat already? Oh, no. I'm going to, are you asking me if I'm going to put it in the chat? No, I'm going to
Yeah.
share it on the screen, the QR code.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, let me just go to it. Okay, here we go. Share screen. All right. Yep. So for Stephanie, anybody else interested, you can take a screenshot as well. And then you can also scan the QR code if you want to go directly to where you could sign up. But yeah, those are all the details of what is entailed in our program. So on that Bar Preps Plus side, you get live MBE skill building workshops. Those workshops, we essentially go through 10 questions in a workshop, and we continue to instill that practice we just did today. How to extract the patterns, how to do it. What are the particular tips and tricks for each of the MBE tested subjects, right? All of those things. We do live essay writing workshops where we go through practice essays, we dissect them, break them down. Here's what you do. Here's why you do that. Here's what you should have avoided, all those things. We have accountability and mental health check-ins for those that appreciate that additional support. And then, we do a lot to make that bar prep experience as enjoyable as possible. So we do have additional extras and surprises of things that we do for the people who want that premium experience. And then on the other side, we also have our Legally Fit Bar Prep, which I would consider is like our elevated self-study. And with that, you still have access to office hours, which you get with Bar Prep Plus as well. But really what you're going to get there is, again, all of these amazing materials that we have that when I'm telling you, like, you'll understand the law better than you ever have. You will understand the law better than you ever have. Like, that was my whole thing as a first generation student, was that the law is taught to me in a way that it's like it's in another language. So I had to decode it, break it down. So we use real life examples, things we can relate to really establish a foundational understanding. And then from there, we're better prepared for the anti-recoil widget scenario, and the other more complicated context. So those are the two programs. If anybody has any questions regarding the program or anything else, I'll stick around for a few extra minutes. Okay.
Hello, my name is Thurman Green. I have a question.
Yeah, man, go for it, Thurman. Nice to meet you.
How are you? So I am a older student, and I've taken it several times. One of my challenges is I work full time. So how does your program incorporate the time for a working person?
Yeah. So I actually had this discussion earlier with the student. And so one, the reality is that, improvement with the bar exam really has more or less a direct correlation to time, right? Again, just like any other skill, they'd say, how do you become a master of something? And it's 10,000 hours, and like, that's just the route to it. You don't need 10,000 hours, I don't think. I haven't done the math when it comes to the bar, but the reality is that there is a requisite amount of time. Now, when you're in a position where you have personal commitments, you have work that are simply things that must be incorporated into your life to where you can't have full-time study, you are now in the boat of, how do I maximize the time that I have, which makes it still possible for you to pass? How do I make the best use of instead of 8 hours a day, maybe it's only 4 hours a day. So part of that is, as a repeat taker, especially, knowing specifically where your biggest areas of improvement are, right? And where you need the most attention. So then once you know that, you can prioritize your time. So that's a big thing, is just like awareness of what really to focus on. Sometimes our scorecards tell us that, right? If you have a significantly lower score on the MBE, well, I need to do more MBE with my time, right? If you have a significantly lower essay, right, then essay. So, and typically, right, students might want some consultation or some coaching, at least in the beginning, to help them figure out how to prioritize their time when they're in that boat. So that's number one, is prioritizing your time. And then two, within our program, I think Legally Fit has one of the better schedules for a working student because we create a schedule that is very clean, clear, and modular, right? So I'm going to illustrate on the board for you really quickly to explain. When you take most programs, you're often juggling a lot of different things in one day, right? You're touching multiple subjects and you're doing multiple tasks where it's kind of hard to simply say, like, all right, how do I cut this in half? Or how do I do a third of this? Because it'll say, oh, do 20 contract MBE questions and review torts and then do this one essay. And it's like, like that could be difficult, right? Because it's not all treated equally. With my program, we like to do bulk work. We bulk our work together. So for each class, you average 3 days for that class in that first 7 weeks. Each class has a learn day, it has an essay day, and it has an MBE day. On learn day, your only thing that you're doing, your only task is to relearn that subject, to refamiliarize yourself with the rules, right? So this is a day to get all that information back in. I give you tools and resources to use, and you, let's say, again, on average, right? Let's say it's like 8 hours for right now. Typically for the full-time students, a little bit more, but let's just say 8 at the moment. Right? I give you all those tools and resources. If you only have 4 hours, right, then we just come up with a slightly different method here, right? So then there's a time saver method to go through that in a more expedited way. On essay day, it's 8 hours. And the goal then is that students are doing 6 essays. Like that's your assignment. Well, if you have 4 hours, your goal now is to do 3 essays. On MBE day, it's to do 90 questions in 8 hours. Well, you only have 4 hours. So now I'm doing 45 questions, right? So this is why I say our program is very clean, clear, and modular, that if you have less time, it's pretty easy to see where to cut that. And it's just the reality that we all have to be comfortable with when that you're trying to, as we used Stephanie's example with the gumbo, if you're trying to make gumbo in 1 hour, it's just like, look, like we're cutting corners, we're doing things different. And if I'm lucky and if I'm good enough, maybe this gumbo still comes out really good, right? But we can't ignore the fact that this is typically a process that takes 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, right? Some 2 days. So yeah. Thoughts, additional questions?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So that's how that works, man. Prioritize the time, like know that all right, this is my circumstances, I'm working, prioritize the time. And then, yeah, here's how our schedule works to make it easy for you to adjust your schedule to working. Cool. All right, Hassan, Stephanie, do you guys have any other questions before we hop off for tonight?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much for this. I really appreciate you.
Awesome. You are so welcome, Stephanie. All right, Hassan, what about you?
Yeah, thank you. I don't have much question. I don't have a question for now because I just checked in at the hotel. I can't speak because I don't want to disturb the other guests. That is why you can't hear me.
Got you. Okay. All right. So no worries then. So yeah, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out, email us. And yeah, guys, best of luck on your journey of passing the bar. We hope to see you in our program, and good luck.
Thank you.
You're welcome.